Lesson 10, spring semester of 2022. Every time I say that, it just sounds wrong. It should be 19 something. But looking at the book of Numbers, and last time we were looking at Balaam, and you've had this screen a while back. It wouldn't be your last one, but just to list these different categories. And we covered the first two, the foolish prophet and the frustrated prophet. And then we went into some characteristics after that. But now, going back to his characteristic as a filthy prophet. Balaam was called by God to be a prophet of God and had an awesome responsibility, but also the promise of God's blessings on his life if he followed God. But his greed got to him, and his own opinions got to him on the way that things should be run. And one of the things that he did was he attempted, he could not curse Israel. God would not allow him to curse Israel. And Balaam should have known that. He was a Midianite, if you remember, a descendant of Abraham and Keturah. And so therefore he would know the Abrahamic covenant very well. And yet he still tried to do his own thing. And now, since he can't get his way as far as cursing them, his sinful lifestyle does allow him to corrupt Israel. In Numbers 25, 1-3 says, "And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bow down their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel." So what we have here now is the intermarrying between the Moabites and the Israelites. Now, that in itself is not a sin. Okay? It wasn't a sin for Israel to marry outside their people. I mean, Moses himself married an Ethiopian woman. And so that wasn't the problem. But the problem was, we know what kind of people these are, because it says they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods. And that's the problem. In the New Testament, it says, "Be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers." And that refers to, I think, more than marriage, I think it refers to everyday life. Business, you should never go into business with an unsaved person, or a person of a different belief system than your Christian beliefs, because it's going to cause problems. In a marriage, obviously, that's going to cause problems. So God said, avoid that. And so, so the problem is not the Moabites as such, but the problem is that they were pagan. And Israel joined itself unto unto Baal Peor, so there's Baal worship. And now there's a big problem that's going on here. And then the fallen prophet. "And they slew the kings of Midian, beside the river of them that were slain, namely, the rest of them, I said river, but the rest of them that were slain, namely Evi and Rechem and Zur, and Hur and Reba, 5 kings of Midian. Balaam also, the son of Beor, they slew with the sword." I believe what we're witnessing here is a premature death. There's people who say they believe that you're not going to die until your number comes up. And I don't know anybody who truly believes it. I've heard people say it, but I don't know anybody who truly believes that. Because if you truly believe you're not going to die until your numbers come up, you would look both ways when you cross the street. You know, you wouldn't be afraid of dying, because you wouldn't die until your number came up. And that is absolutely not true. It's not in the Bible anyway whatsoever. And yet, in fact, in the Bible it tells us, honor thy father and thy mother, so that your days will be lengthened upon the earth. And so if you don't honor them, your days will be shortened. Anna and Sapphira died prematurely because they lied to God. Balaam here died prematurely because of his sinful lifestyle. He was called by God to do a great work and could have been honored by God. We could be talking about him in a great way, as one of the great priests, or great prophets of Israel. But instead, because of his lifestyle. Then we look at his character in the New Testament. This reveals a whole lot about who he is.
What was that last part, Dr. K? In the New Testament, okay.
Second Peter 2:15, we see he mentions his way. It says the way of Balaam, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. And yet we have people today doing the exact same thing. They're called by God to do whatever God calls them to do. Not just a pastor or a missionary as such, but everybody in life that is born again, God has called them to a great work. And by far, most, it seems, are more concerned about the wages of unrighteousness than they are the ways of God. I've seen it with people who, it's not a sin to have money, a lot of money. It's not a sin to be rich. But the temptation to do wrong is much greater, I think, to those that are rich. Because people honor the rich because they're rich. And I think they honor them because they hope they'll get something out of it. You know, I remember reading a psychology report years ago, and they did a test on the streets, and they took an old junk car and stopped at a red light, and after the light turned green, they had the car just stay there to see how long it would take for people to start blowing their horn. And they said it was almost immediate sometimes with people to light green, blow the horn. But they took a really expensive car and did the same thing. And they said sometimes it would be a couple light changes before people blow the horn. Because they're the wealth factor, I guess. And it shouldn't be like that, but that's the way a lot of people are, and they let that money get ahead of them in their relationship with God. And so they love the wages of righteousness. I know a guy I used to work for had several $1 million, I guess. His business was worth that. And he did great for a long time. I mean, he was in church, and back in church here, he even came to the Bible college, graduated from Bible college. But after a while, he went back to his old ways of doing things, ended up leaving his wife, and I mean, just a big mess and all that, because money has always been the most important thing in his life. And he said it was the Lord at one time, he even had a ministry singing, and had a great voice, but he threw all that away because of money. He loved that more than anything else. His error, the error of Balaam, found in Jude verse 11. And this happens a lot here too with people. Balaam convinced himself that he could curse Israel because Israel needed to be judged for their sins. And so basically what he did, he kind of justified his actions. You know, well, you pay me to curse them, and you know God doesn't want to curse them. But then again, Israel is a sinful nation right now. They're not doing right, so maybe I should curse them, what have you. And a lot of people have the same attitude. They think that other people should be cursed by God because of the way that they're treated. And if somebody treats me bad, then that person should be cursed by God. When in fact, God knows what needs to be judged and what does not need to be judged. And we can't go against God, even though, you know, the end doesn't justify the means. If somebody's doing wrong, we can't treat them wrong because they're doing wrong. You know, we can't render evil for evil. We have to render good for evil. And Balaam lost sight of that. He lost sight, thinking, okay, I can't judge them because I see that they're sinful, therefore, you know, God should curse them. And the fact is, let's leave that all to God. If he's going to judge, he'll judge righteously. We won't. And there's a lot of things that we just don't know about people. We don't know what people are going through. We don't know whether they're right with God at times or not right with God. We might think we do, but we probably don't. And then his doctrine. And this goes back to him convincing the children of Israel it's okay to be with the Moabites. It says doctrine of Balaam in Revelation 2:14, and that's all one verse there. But it says doctrine of Balaam, who cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel to eat those things sacrificed unto idols and to commit fornications. And so here's a prophet of God who feels like it's okay for Israel to go with the Moabites, not caring what the Moabites believe or not. to convince God's people to mix with them. And this convincing here ended up causing the death of 24,000 Israelites. There's too many pastors who find it easier to do nothing than to do the right thing. I remember I had a student a while back, it's back in the early, I think it may have started in 91 or 92. And he was going to church in Greensburg. I remember the name of the church he was going to because it was the New Hope Baptist Church in Greensburg. And he came to me one day and he said, "Yeah, I got a problem." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, we've got a deacon in our church that owns a nightclub. I mean, it's just," he said, "it's just a horrible place. Everybody knows that's a horrible place." And he said, "I just don't think that it would be okay for him to run a nightclub and be a deacon." And I said, "Well, you talked to the pastor about it?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, maybe you should." The next week, I was talking to him, and I asked him, I said, "Did you talk to the pastor?" He said, "No." He said, "Because last weekend," he said, "there was the guy that owns the nightclub, who was a deacon, shot somebody in his nightclub. And he's been arrested for murder." And he said, before I could go to the pastor got up in the pulpit and said that we should be praying for this guy, that he shouldn't be in jail even though he shot somebody. And he just defended this guy a lot. And I asked him, "Well, why do you think that is?" He said, "Well, he does give a lot of money to the church." We had another student who came, and at his church, he found out that the music director in the church had been molesting kids in the church. And it had even attempted to molest his own son. And the guy got arrested and put in prison. And he said, every single service, our pastor says we need to be praying for this guy to let this guy out of prison. You know, what he did wasn't that bad, and he shouldn't have gone to jail for this. And just defend him all the way. And I'm thinking, you know, why would you do that? And I said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" He said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Well, I've never told anybody to leave the church." I said, "Because that's not my job." I said, "You do what the Holy Spirit wants you to do." And the next week he found out the church he went to. And just, I can tell you more stories about that, about pastors doing the wrong thing. One of them who told his congregation when they take communion now, he said, we will no longer be ever mentioning the confession of sin when we take communion. And they asked him why. He said, "Well, we just won't." And within a few months, that pastor was dead. And so the only great thing I can, and I don't know the situation, but if he doesn't want to mention sin, that's probably because he's committing sin. And I mean, and communion, that's the most important time to make sure your sins are confessed. So it's amazing.
It's very sacred.
It's amazing how many people follow people like that too.
Well, they do, and that's what
For
it
some
does
reason,
amaze me.
yeah, it amazes
The
me.
number of pastors in this town that have commit or are still committing known adultery, and yet people still go to the church
They
and
sure
people
do.
excuse it.
And they defend them.
Yeah,
You better not say anything about those pastors, they go, "Ooh."
I know one of them where they said they set him down for 6 months because he was committing adultery. And they also paid him while he was no longer allowed in the pulpit for 6 months. So basically, he committed adultery and they gave him 6 months vacation, paid vacation. It just,
Yeah, it's like they're paying him for doing wrong.
yeah.
Reward.
Yeah. I mean, years ago, it seemed like, many years ago, that when a pastor did something in the church, he had to quit the ministry and end up selling insurance. You know, something like that.
Oh,
And now, people don't care.
No, they don't.
And so the church is becoming more and more corrupt. Balaam turns some away from the Lord here. And what I want to look at is the Old Testament passage concerning this and the New Testament passage concerning this. Because some people believe that there's an error in the Scriptures in these two passages. because number says that no, those that died in the plague were 24,000. And Paul said in 1 Corinthians, no, let us commit fornication. Some of them committed and fell in one day 23,000. So is there an error in the scripture? One says 24 and one says 23.
Nope.
The best and quick answer should always be no, there's no error. You may not know why there's no error, but we should always assume there's no error. You know, because that's giving God the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
So how can we explain this then? If you say, somebody says this is an error, and you say no, then they're going to ask, well, why is it not an error? And we need to know the answer.
Yes.
So what is the answer? The answer is actually so simple that people overlook it. You know what a rhetorical question is? That's a question you ask when you don't expect an answer. That's not a rhetorical question I'm asking. But how do we fix this? How do we find out that the Bible's not wrong?
Now, wait a minute, let me read them. They died in the plague with 24,000. Not to let us commit fornication. But there's two, but are these the same?
It is the same event.
Okay, because I was just going to say maybe
Right.
they're different events, okay.
Right, and that's a good way to look at it. First, find out, make sure that they are the same event. But they are.
But one is from the Old Testament, one
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
New Testament.
Yeah. And they counted the same in the Old Testament as the New Testament. So
Okay, tell us, because I'm excited.
yeah. It's so simple. You're going to kick yourself when you see this.
Can we look at it for just a few minutes?
I can
Okay.
tell you.
Okay.
This is one of the reasons why I use the King James, is that the King James is a word-for-word translation, meaning that every single word is important. In fact, there's 3 words that make a big difference in these 2 verses. 3 little words. Give up.
Does it have something to do with in one day?
It has everything to do with in one
In
day.
one day.
Yeah, because
Uh-huh.
24,000 people died. How many died in one day? 23,000.
Uh-huh.
The other 1,000 died on the other days. They live longer.
Okay.
So that's the answer. If it said as some of them committed and fell 3 and 20,000,
That's
then there would be a problem.
Mhm.
Yeah, because if Paul said that only 23,000 died, then it would be an error in Scripture.
Yeah.
But what he's saying is they fell just in one day alone.
On one day.
There was 23,000.
And that may have taken a month.
Yeah, that could have taken a month. It could have taken 2 days, 3
So
days,
it
4
was
days, 5
20
days.
and
Yeah.
4,000.
Yeah, and so that's what every single word matters. In one day,
It does matter.
it matters significantly, because that makes it not an error. I mean, how many people have died from COVID? Well, for you to know, it's never great, I'm
They
sure.
weren't keeping up with it, but
Yeah.
now just let it go.
Yeah, I mean, now we don't hear much about it.
No.
But they didn't all die in one day. We could say, 5 million people died from COVID, and that would be accurate. But we wouldn't say they all died
In
in
one
one day.
Right.
We could say 1 million died in one day, and it might be true. I don't know. I mean, you just throw out numbers there. But it does matter. And it shows the significance of reading every single word,
So important.
because it is so easy to skip over. Because what happens as we grow up, when we first learn to read, we read each syllable. Suppose,
Uh-huh.
and that's how we're taught to read.
Yeah.
Now we don't read the words. They're pictures to us.
Mhm.
Because when we look at the word God here, we immediately, without even thinking, without trying to sound out, we know it's the word scriptural because it's a picture. You know the Chinese alphabet?
Mhm.
They have over 3,000 characters in Chinese alphabet. And we think, how in the world can they do that? I mean, we have 26 characters,
Yeah.
and they have over 3,000. Well, we have the same ability they do because this word here we don't read, we see it.
Mhm.
Just like a Chinese character would be a word, a whole word. They see it.
Yeah.
And so as we go, you know, there's a lot of pictures that we know. They're pictures of words is really what we're looking at rather than reading the word. But when it comes down to the Bible, make sure that you take time to look at every single word and don't assume you know what the verse is going to say. All right, go back and read it. Meditate on it. You know, I'm going through Ecclesiastes right now in my Bible study. And so I'm looking at every single word. And you know, a couple of days I've looked at the first verse and just meditate on that first verse. See, you know, because there's so much great things in the Bible that it's easy for us to miss if we don't study the verse. You know, we study the passage, the chapter, the book. It's so important that we actually study. God promised Phineas here in Numbers 25 his covenant of peace. And I'm not going to go into all the detail of this because it's very, very complicated as to what happened. But for a long time I've heard people say that when King Saul was told to wait for Samuel to offer up a sacrifice, that when Saul offered up a sacrifice himself, that he usurped the authority of the priest. That's why God judged him at that point. And I heard that for a long time, and that's one of those things, you know, I heard and I accepted, never even thought about, and I'm sure I've even taught it at one time or the other. But that's not true. Because Samuel was never a priest. He was a prophet, but he wasn't a priest. He wasn't a Levite. He would not be qualified. Remember, Hannah gave her son to Eli to raise. Eli was the high priest. Eli had a couple of sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and Samuel was given to him, but it still didn't make him a Levite. You can't go from one tribe as a man to a woman can marry a Levite and she therefore becomes a Levite. But a man could not marry a Levite woman, whatever his tribe was. If he was from Ephraim, he was still an Ephraimite. And so sometimes people get confused about Samuel and the priesthood as such. But Samuel was not the priest. In fact, Eli was the priest. And either Hophni or Phinehas, his sons, who were wicked, remember they died when they took the Ark of the Covenant. One of those, probably Phinehas, was actually the high priest. And we know that because remember what happened to Eli when he heard that the Ark had been taken in battle. Remember the story?
He just fell dead.
He fell over on his chair. The Bible says that he couldn't see, and he was a fat man.
He was really fat, yeah.
Real fat, and he fell over backwards in his chair. Broke his neck. I think it was neck. He wasn't high priest at that point. Why? He was blind. Right? A high priest could not have any blemish on him.
Oh, okay.
And so he had reigned for 40 years as a high priest, as such, but because he could no longer function as a high priest because of his blindness, it had to be passed on to the next, to the eldest son, is typically what they would do. And so one of his sons probably was reigning as priest at the time.
Which one was the oldest? Hophni, what's
Hophni and Phinehas.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Hophni and Phinehas.
Yeah, but remember though, both those died in the battle before Eli died.
Okay.
So the priesthood then got a little bit confused because it wasn't probably given to the right person as such. And what we see, the switch from Eleazar to Ithamar. Eleazar, we know, was the son of Aaron. He was the second high priest. And Ithamar was another son, but he wasn't the high priest. What happened in Eli's line, and we don't really know why. There's a lot of speculation of why. But Ithamar's descendants started becoming the high priest instead of Eleazar's. I'm not really sure why. Even the Jewish Talmud and their writings, Mishnah and all that, they don't explain why. But in David's day, he returned it to a man by the name of Zadok, who did come from the line of Eleazar. And so Eli, yes, he was high priest because God said he was. But for whatever reason, he came through the wrong lineage. I mean, he still came from, he was a descendant of Aaron, right? But the high priest should have came through Eleazar at this point, but instead it came through Ithamar. And David, in his reign, later on would return the priesthood. So just, I'd say sometimes God tells us in the Bible things that happen, but he doesn't explain why. And he doesn't have to. You know, he's God. You know.
That's right.
If he said, because I said so,
That's right.
that's the way it is. Phineas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, hath turned my wrath away from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake among them, that I consumed not the children of Israel my jealousy. So Phineas here does step in, who was the son of Eleazar, and prays for Israel after they're being judged. So the hero here is Phineas, in that he went to God, he went on the people's behalf, and God listened to him. And it shows the importance of prayer. You know, God knows what's going on, God knows our need, but God also expects us to do our part. And Phineas here is honored by God for doing his part in praying for the people. Wherefore say, behold, I give unto him my covenant of peace, and he shall have it, and his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God, and made an atonement for the children of Israel. And so this is probably the reason why that eventually the priesthood would go back to Zadok, to the proper line. King Zadok the priest, Manasseh son of Jehoiada, and Nathan the prophet, just standing there as a priest. Now, one of the most important things that happened in Israel when they went into the promised land was that they had to divide up the kingdom. And they had divided up into tribes. And I've talked about this many, many times before. Moses had all kinds of problems in the wilderness because the people didn't have anything to do other than to walk and bury their dead and unpack their tents and pack their tents and walk and bury the dead. I mean, that was it. In Joshua's day, they had all kinds of things to do. They had to first go into the promised land itself. They had to rid the Canaan of the Canaanites. They had to set up camps everywhere. They had to set up Shiloh for the temple, or the ark rather. They had to divide out the tribes by territory. They had to form a military. They had to plant. They had to build houses. All kinds of things that they had to do. One of the very important things that God did tell them, that when they went to the land, that the land, remember, would be divided into 12 tribes or 12 counties. Right? So think of Israel as a state, and the official name is the state of Israel. So it's a state, and within that state, in Bible times, there were 12 different counties. Right? That was each of the tribes. And actually ended up being 2.5 tribes on the east side of Jordan, and the other 9.5 on the west side of Jordan. So, but it says that all those territories had to be mapped out and told where you could live, where you couldn't live, and then the families had to decide, okay, I'm from the tribe of Ephraim, and this is where we can live. Where do I set up my house at? And so they had to get all those things situated. But very importantly, they had set up the cities of refuge. There were 12 tribes or 12 counties, but within those counties, there were 48 other cities that belonged to the Levites. So basically, 4 cities of every tribe, or every county had 4 cities that belonged to the Levites, the priests. Okay? 6 of those cities were considered to be cities of refuge. And these were very important cities, and they were spread out here and here, actually 2, 4, 6, basically, as you go up. Which meant that a city of refuge typically would be within a 7-day journey for you. Or at least it was close enough that it didn't take a long time to travel. So if you committed a crime, say manslaughter, and you had to be tried for that to find out whether you were truly guilty of it or not, let's say you were. But if you didn't flee to one of these cities of refuge, then the nearest kinsman to the one that you committed manslaughter had a legal right to kill you. Right? So what you would do is you flee to the city of refuge. Once inside the city of refuge, nobody could lay a hand on you at all, in any way whatsoever. Now, after you were tried and found guilty for manslaughter, you would pay the penalty for that. If you were tried and found for murder, then you'd be put to death. But there was always the trial before that. But nevertheless, you flee to one of these cities.
Now, how many cities you said they were cities of refuge?
6 cities of refuge. Now, the 48 cities that belong to the Levites, of the 48, 6 of them were cities of refuge. So you had 42 cities of Levites, and then 6 more, which were the cities of refuge.
Okay.
I don't know how well you can see the back there. If you can see that red dot.
I see that red dot.
Yeah.
That's all I see.
Yeah. Well, even here you can't read it. I mean, so
No, I see the red dot.
there's red dot, red dot, red dot, red dot up here,
Yeah.
here, and here.
Okay.
And so those were the cities of refuge.
Okay.
Now, this is just a passage here. It says, and among the cities which you shall give unto the Levites shall be 6 cities for the refuge, which you shall appoint for the manslayer, that he may flee thither, and to them you shall add 42 cities. So, of the Levite cities, you got 6, and then you add 42, so all the cities which shall be Levites will be a total of 48 cities.
Okay.
Then shall you give with their suburbs, and the cities which shall give shall be a possession of the children of Israel. I'm not going to read all through that. It's an important passage, but for sake of time. Then you shall appoint you cities to be cities of refuge, for the slayer may flee thither, which kills any persons at unawares. And they shall be into your cities for refuge, from the avenger, that the manslayer die not. So that avenger was a family member.
Okay.
Until he stand before the congregation in judgment. Okay? If he's found innocent, then he's free. If he's found guilty and he leaves the city, that guy can kill him.
Right.
So basically, he would stay in the city until one of 2 things happen. Well, this is very going. These cities, 6 cities shall be for refuge, both the children of Israel, and for the stranger and for the sojourner among them, that everyone that killeth any person unaware may flee thither. When he smite him with an instrument of iron, so that he die, is a murder. The murder shall surely be put to death. He smite him with throwing a stone, wherewith he may die, and he died, well, he's a murder. So it doesn't matter how you kill him, is what God is saying. If that person is found guilty, then they're going to be put to death. If they're guilty of manslaughter, right, and they have to pay the price, they stay in the city of refuge till one of 2 things happen. One was the year of Jubilee.
Now, that's the 50 year.
Yeah, 50th year.
Okay.
Which means that if you're in the 48th year and you commit manslaughter, within 2 years you're out. Or actually a year and you're out.
Okay.
If you committed the year after Jubilee, you're going to stay there a long time.
Yeah.
But that's the way God set it up. The other event, first was the year of Jubilee, the other was the death of the high priest. And so whenever the high priest would die, so chances are you wouldn't stay there 48 years because the high priest would probably come and go while you were there. And that's also why the Bible tells us, and I can't remember the passage, I need to look it up, where there was a specific person that fixed the meals for the high priest that nobody else fixed. Why? Well, because if you knew you had a family member in jail and you wanted them out, you just slip something into the high priest's food, and yeah, you get him out of jail early. And so they tell us that there was that special meal fixed for them.
I always thought that when, I don't know, I probably interpreted this wrong. I thought that if someone died, but I mean, if I kill someone by accident, just was, but the family member is mad with me because I killed their loved one, then these cities were refuge for somebody like me that did it by accident, not on purpose.
It could be that too.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
how I took it.
Yeah,
But now if I kill somebody on purpose, then
Yeah.
I stay there and I face the.
You're gonna be judged for it.
Yeah, okay, that's,
It's like, one of the laws, of the 613 Old Testament laws, one of them that you must have basically a fence around the roof of your house. Right? Why? Something may fall off. Why would people be on your roof? Because that was their patio. When I went to Israel, in Bethlehem, we ran across this guy. He was a Palestinian, I believe. He said he was a Christian, but he had a house there. He invited over to his house. He said to see Bethlehem. And we went to his house, and we went up to the roof of his house, and basically it was like a patio there. It had a curve to it, the roof, I guess for the rain to fall off, whatever. But it gave great view. And he had a little rail around the top of his house, which was the right thing to do. If he didn't have a rail, and you came to his house and fell off, first thing asked, was there a rail around his house? Nope. He's guilty of manslaughter. If it was a rail and you fell off, then it was an accident, it wasn't his fault. Like if you had an animal that killed somebody, you got one chance. After that, if you kept that animal and it killed the second person, then you were guilty of murder because you didn't take care of the animal.
wow. They need to do that for these pit bulls.
Yeah, and and typically that's the rule. If an animal kills something, it used to be the rule that they always kill the animal. Now today I doubt that they would do that. They'd rather put a person to death before they put an animal sometimes. And I love it, the animals, don't get me wrong. It goes on to say, and again, this is just continuing, the revenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer. When he meets him, he shall slay him. But who thrust him of hatred, or hurl at him by lying of weight, that he die, or in enmity smite him with his hands, that he die, he that smote him shall be put to death. So even the avenger had to do it the right way. You couldn't be tricking him and trap him into this, but had to do it God's way. But actually, we'll go ahead and take a break there.